Welcome everybody to our first LGBT History Month event in performing arts this month. My name's James Lovelock. I work at the University of Wolverhampton as a lecturer in musical theatre, and we're presenting this today with the University of Wolverhampton and with ArtsFest as well. And so thank you to both of those for hosting us. I'm really delighted today to welcome Matt Powell, Liam Gartland and Ameena Hamid, who are joining us today to talk about telling queer stories and producing work with LGBT characters. So we were talking just before we started today about the kind of situation in the West End at the moment, and thinking about how in the West End, post-pandemic, perhaps there have been maybe only a few LGBT characters in musicals that are running at the moment. I mean, obviously we've had Death Drop, which Ameena was producing, but at the moment on the West End, there's only, I think, Anne Juliet and Come From Away, and we think possibly Cinderella as well, although I haven't seen that, that have LGBT characters. And certainly at the moment, there are no LGBT protagonists on the West End. But fortunately, there's a lot of work going on in regional theatres and in fringe theatres at the moment, and I'm really happy to be talking to three people who have been involved in bringing work both in the West End and off West End and in regional theatres as well. So I'm going to get Matt, Liam and Ameena to introduce themselves first of all, and then please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A, and we'll have a bit of a discussion today about how we can tell queer stories effectively through musical theatre. So let's start off with Matt, if that's okay.
I'm the mute button. Hi, I'm Matt. My pronouns are they, he, she, and I'm a musical theatre creative, and I would describe my producing practice as artist development. I tend to work with composers at the start of an idea and help get it onto its sort of first iteration in the world, ranging from digital productions to fringe scale and sort of audio things as well. Thanks,
Matt. Liam?
Hello, my name is Liam Gartland and my pronouns are he, him. I run two companies. My first company is the GradFest, which is a company that provides opportunities for recent theatre graduates. And then I also produce independently in venues around London. And a lot of my work is about bringing new voices to the stage and looking at how we can kind of represent new voices, like through more musical theatre, but also plays as well.
Thanks, Liam. Lovely. And Ameena?
Hi, I'm Ameena Hamid. I run Ameena Hamid Productions. I'm a commercial creative producer. That's too many C's, but there you go. And most recently, I co-produced The Wiz with the Hope Mill Theatre. I work a lot in drag, so I've done work obviously on Death Drop as a producer, also on Panto of Dick Whittington, which was all drag as well. So like quite a bit of work, and like Liam, my practice really is surrounding representation, increasing representation both on and off stage, and particularly with putting joy at the heart of it rather than trauma.
Thanks, Ameena. I think that's really lovely as well. And actually, one of the things when I speak to LGBTQ people about representation, I think joy is such an important part of it. We have had a lot of stories that have been trauma stories, particularly when we were first getting represented. And actually, I think it's really important to put joy at the heart of what we do. I wanted to kind of move talk a little bit about this idea of representation and thinking about how we centre voices that perhaps are not heard as much in musical theatre, because I think one of the things that I talk about a lot with our students is the idea of, yes, this is LGBT History Month, so it's great that LGBT people are being centred here, but also we all have other identities and other parts of ourselves that are really important, and thinking about LGBT identities alongside race, alongside social class, alongside gender, all sorts of other things, disability, deafness. And I'm really interested in, I suppose, in the fact that you all have production companies, or at least one production company which has your own name in it. I'm really interested in what you would say is kind of your mission, and whether you have quite a specific mission, or if there are, if it's a little bit more kind of working as things go along. So yeah, I suppose that's what I'm asking is how does your company help help to improve representation, and what areas are you particularly interested, which voices are you particularly interested in amplifying? And I'll let anyone else, Liam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I think because I started producing when I started the GradFest, so a lot of my passion and drive for that was to get voices onto a stage that possibly hadn't had a chance before. And then when I started to produce independently, it was about how I could connect, you know, new voices with people who, you know, have some kind of credits behind them, and how we can put them on the stage together to elevate both of them at the same time, and really find that way of working and how we can kind of develop that. But yeah, I think that's what I find most important, is looking at, you know, 2022 and looking at, you know, the diverse community in our theatre world that we have. It's about how we can make sure that every voice is represented and all audience members feel like they have some, you know, representation on that stage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The other thing that I really loved about you, Liam, is that when I saw you put a call out, this was quite a while ago, and I can't remember what it was for. It was somebody on the production company, but you were specifically looking for LGBTQ people, but also working class people as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we don't talk about very much in representation, in terms of who has access to musical theatre in the first place. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Yeah, so that was when I was working on Tell Me Straight, which we took to the King's Head. Now that was about a working class, you know, a working class kind of upbringing, but also, you know, someone who is gay. And it's how I think telling that story, we wanted to make sure that not only just in the cast, but in the creative team, people were represented throughout. And, you know, whether that was because you were working class or because you were part of the queer community, you felt like you had kind of a connection to the piece, whether you were a stage manager or whatever. So yeah, and that's something that I think is important. If there's a reason why you're doing that piece, I think it's very important to try and highlight them in both, you know, the creative team and in the cast as well. Because I think sometimes people forget, and the cast, you know, the cast looks wonderful and it's so diverse and it's got so many voices, but then the creative team lacks that sometimes. And that's, I think, where the bridge crosses. And I think what Ameena does very well is do that, is find ways to bring people in the creative team that, you know, will be represented.
Do you want to say more about that, Ameena? Since we've just mentioned you.
It's very funny. Yeah, I mean, I think people often get told to sort of stay in a lane or pick a battle, pick a fight. And I think it's just, it's ridiculous. Like, I'm a young woman, I'm disabled, I'm bisexual, I'm Black. Like, I can't pick one of those battles. Like, and you know, I can't pick one part of my intersecting identities. So when it comes to spotlighting people and to bringing people into the conversation, I think it's incredibly important to go, do you know what, we're all an intersection of identities, and every group should be that and should be representative of that. Yeah, I think like what Liam's saying about representation behind the stage, it's the harder part of it, because it's very easy to go, well, very few people are actually going to see who is on your creative team, because we tend to not put pictures of them anywhere, and we're like, oh, you don't really know from their name what they look like or who they are or what their identity is. And I think at the moment, visibility is particularly important. So for the Wiz, for example, we were really keen on making sure that we did a photo shoot with our creative team alongside our cast, and we didn't hide any of that. And like, everyone who's part of the team, you know, that was there. That's not all of the team in the photo shoot, but it was really important to make sure that we could get people seeing, hey, that person looks like me, that person, like, I can find out more about this person, and more about their identity and how it aligns with me or doesn't align with who I am. I think that was incredibly important to us, and still is. What you're saying about putting our names in our companies, I can't speak for everyone, but the reason that I did it, I went through like a list of different things, and both of my parents are Sudanese, so I speak Arabic, and I was like, I'm gonna pick an Arabic word did not work. I was like, none of these fit, none of these like feel right. And the reason that I ended up going for my own name was because I look so different to what everyone else looks like, really. And it was kind of all about that. It was about going, do you know what, the visibility of me doing this job, of someone who looks so different to what everyone else looks like, was incredibly important. And I think a lot of people think it's about ego, and in all honesty, I wish there was a world where I didn't have to be like the face of anything or on any media or anything like that. But the value of it, and every single time someone speaks to me and goes, I really appreciate what you're doing with work, I really appreciate your mission statement. I have a very clear mission statement that's all about bringing everyone together. The reason for it was being able to go, I don't look like Cameron McIntosh or Andrew Lloyd Webber, all of these people, and that is great, and that is perfect, and that's the way that theatre should be. And I think until we're really honest about the fact that actually, if you visibly look at who producers are, who creative teams are, and particularly on the West End, it's appalling. Like, if you actually put us all in a room together, there's not enough people who like are coming from all different backgrounds. And so I think until we're honest about that, and we're honest about the visibility, the like lack of visibility, we're not going to fix the problem, because representation matters and role models really matter. On and off stage. And I think it's great that those roles are being filled by, you know, there are those roles, but they're so few. And they're also often so like selective of who they are. I think like representation of people of color in those roles is even worse. Like, you know, and as you go down that lift, it gets even worse. And like in terms of disability and all of these things, I think it's incredibly important to make sure that we're looking at all of these intersections and all of these different things, and recognizing that it's terrible right now, but it can get better. And there's people like Matt and Liam, like particularly, who are doing this work to make it better. So, you know, I'm hopeful. I've said a lot of very sad things, and I've gone, but there's great like swathes of hope in all of these people that are, you know, representing these groups.
I think one of the things with the Wiz as well was one of the things that people have often said to me. My background, just for anybody that doesn't know, I'm a researcher into LGBTQ representation in musical theatre. I have a book coming out eventually, hooray! But as part of that book, I interviewed 90 people across the LGBTQ community who are involved in musical theatre. And one of the things that people used to sometimes say, and I always used to feel uncomfortable with, was, oh, it's always important to cast the best person in the room. But of course, that depends on who you've got on your audition panel. And one of the things that I loved about The Wiz was that you had Ryan Carter in there as I think for the first time doing some working with casting with some support from others. But the fact that Ryan was there making those decisions along with a creative team, an all-black creative team, and then suddenly it becomes very different, because who the best person in the room is very different, because there are now different people deciding on who that is. I wonder, do you find it, it is quite, I mean, there are lots of people out there, right, that can do these jobs, aren't there? It's not a case of, it's really difficult to find, you know, black people or Asian people or whatever it might be to do these jobs. They are out there. I am right with that, aren't I? Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the time, the thing we find is about kind of not being unskilled, but being underskilled, which essentially means that just people land at a position where they're actually incredibly good at what they do, but they're working on a fringe level, and nobody's gone, let's just give them to work on a commercial level, to work on a larger scale, to work in a larger house. There are so many people that are incredibly good at what they do, but aren't being given that opportunity just because they don't know the right people. That's always what it comes down to. And every time people are putting together their teams, and I think everyone is like it's very easy to do this, turn around to people that you already know and go, I trust you and I care a lot about this show. So, you know, and when the people that you already know happen to all look the same or be from the same background, you do end up kind of perpetuating this over and over again. But those people are absolutely out there, and they're doing amazing work. And I think, you know, it's incredibly frustrating, but I also completely understand how it happens. Because we've all been in that situation where you're like, oh crap, I need to put together a team in 2 weeks. I need to go to the people I know. It's a lot harder to go, oh, do you know what? I really need to make sure that this team has all of this like representation in it. And I'm going to take a bit of a risk on this person who hasn't done something above fringe level before, but I've seen all of their work and I think they can do it. For The Wiz, for example, like with Ryan's role, but with a few different roles, what we did was we had a person who was, underrepresented in that area, in that role, take it on, and then had mentorship and that kind of opportunity instead. So that we could build, they felt like they had a support network in the system there, but also were able to fully do the job and claim the role for themselves. Because a lot of the time, the thing that you find, and like this is just speaking for people of color, but if it's a lot of minority groups where we're not given the same opportunity because we don't know the right people, and we're often not given the same opportunity in terms of being supported in that way of going, oh, you're really great at this. Like, that's why we all have imposter syndrome, really. And so because of that, often we have the skills to be at that level, but nobody's gone, yeah, you have the skills to be at that level. So we're working here at that level. We're working at like this point and kind of going, do you know what? If we give you a mentor, you'll find that all of the questions you're asking, you already know the answer to.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Ameena. So go on, Liam.
I think it's really interesting, actually, on that point, what Ameena said, because, of course, in the commercial sector, when budgets are really tight and, and you don't have a lot of money to play with, but, with the support from, places like the Arts Council that would help benefit and bring in somebody who would be able to mentor or things like that, it would then benefit the production more and be able to give more opportunities out. But I think we're at such a little bridge, and especially coming out of the pandemic, where the commercial sector is trying to build back up, and and the money just is not available, really, especially with the audience and the amount of audience that you're dealing with. But I think, like what Ameena did with the Wiz, that giving them opportunities and platforming people to give them that first credit so that they are able to move on and get another job and then become successful.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm thinking actually, Matt, about your work with writers there as well. I'm thinking particularly about your work with people like Jude Taylor, Lewis Cornet, and some of the work that you've been involved in developing, because I think your company has a slightly different role, as you alluded to at the very beginning. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what your company is representing.
Yeah, I've always had a real passion for like talent development and artist development, because I've often found, even in sort of like early days of running youth theatres and stuff like that, that work always comes back to giving space, like within a performance setting, to develop and to move forward. And particularly over the last 2 years, it's been interesting speaking to so many writers who have brilliant ideas that are needing to get out into the world, and they often find themselves producing their own work or sharing their own work out individually, and not having that sort of support system in place through a producer to do that, searching for funding or looking for opportunity to showcase and things like that. And so I've sort of really leaned into kind of an artist development producing role. I wouldn't say the work I do is commercial, because I tend to only do projects through Arts Council funding and stuff like that where I can. And the thing I've really noticed is when you put a bit of that investment into just giving that space or a few days of workshop to an artist, things like that, who hasn't had the opportunity before, it can lead to the growth of fantastic things. Jude being an interesting example, someone who'd written 3 or 4 musicals that hadn't had much sort of external or audience viewership, but through a small amount of commission and sort of development space cooked up, that work is now going in front of audiences now. And it's an interesting, I've been thinking a lot about what those structures and strategies are, and I think there is something really in creating opportunity in all sort of theatre concepts that are to do with mentorship or just development driven spaces where there isn't much output. I think sometimes kind of society can feel like it fails us, and therefore we sometimes need spaces where we can be encouraged to experiment, encouraged to see what if, over having that major output and the like.
I love that phrase, what if. It's one of my favorite things to use when we're writing musicals at the university. I always tell my students that's one of the most important things, the what if question, and it's wonderful to have the space, I think, to be able to explore those. Matt, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the project you're working on currently with Jude, Is He Musical? Because that's literally going into production live streaming in the next 2 weeks, isn't it? Or sorry to frighten you, but yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a rehearsal going on 20 miles away now. It was an interesting one. It came out of an event last year where I commissioned some writers to write about LGBTQ plus history, as I think a lot of narratives, historical narratives, tend to focus around the AIDS epidemic and often don't really stretch further past sort of the 1960s. And Jude found a documentary that was about two queer men revisiting the spots they would frequent in the 1930s. And we soon discovered this rich nightlife and history. And Jude, being the slightly crazy human he is after writing a song, wrote a musical that then went through stages of workshop and development through a variety of small spaces. And then we were lucky to get a vault space. We were lucky to get some Arts Council funding and have since realigned that show. But what's been quite interesting and what's sort of come out of that over the past few weeks, Jude has been very transparently involved in every step of the producing side of the development process. And one thing I've noticed in particular is how he has been as much of a producer as I have in that project, and I'm also involved in directing that project. And so we've been looking at ways of crediting that involvement Jude's had, because without Jude's equal sort of pushing and sharing of a development space, or like looking for opportunities and sort of co-applying for those, we wouldn't probably be in the space we are now. And so one thing that we've done, particularly with this project, is had a co-credit producing title on it, using the production company as a vehicle for someone who Jude would probably have to set loads of things up to get to that stage, to get his own work on if there wasn't that space or structure that already existed to put through. So we've been looking at sort of co-producing titles, bringing writer or other people through a company to do that. And that's what we've started to do with Is He Musical. And so far that's been quite exciting and seems to have worked quite well. But yeah, it's a bit of a crazy time bringing the show into the world, but it's been nice to see something so organically grow from a development process, and also so rapidly as well. It's sort of gone against the tradition of how long it can sometimes take a new musical to get to the stage. It's only been a year. So yeah, it's been an interesting time. Just got the scary bit to do now of actually doing it, I think.
Do you want to give us some information about when that show is on? And if you're very welcome to put like links in the chat as well, but when's it being streamed, and it's live as well, isn't it? A couple of theatres.
It is. When
I have put you on the spot, sorry.
Now remembering numbers, which is a fun thing to do sometimes. It's live streaming from the Uni of Wolverhampton, where I'm a PhD student exploring queer producing. It's on there at the 17th, the 18th as a live stream, and then it's transferring to Curve for one night only on the 20-something of February, and then goes to the other palace a few days later. I'll put a link in the chat. His dates seem to have just disappeared out of my mind at this moment.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Matt. And I was going to link that into Liam. You've got a production that's so I keep saying, like, making this really dramatic, is imminent. That's a little bit about Elegies.
Elegies, yeah. I mean, Elegies is a wonderful piece that the King's Head approached us at the GradFest with, and it kind of all came together at once and very nicely and just all aligned, and we were like, yeah, let's do it. But I think with that, it's very important for us at the GradFest, especially bringing in, new voices into theatre and trying to get them seen by, casting directors, other producers, and people who have power in the industry to give them jobs. It's very important that we highlight, all of our queer community of graduates and make sure that we do that. And it was perfect to kind of align that with Elegies. And really make sure that the casting was done correctly in terms of representing, voices through characters. And we have literally just signed off the cast this morning, which is really nice and exciting. And it's really, I think, for us, it's kind of a really nice step to see all of these diverse faces on one sheet that all fit the bill for this wonderful show, because there's not many shows where you can have 30 people on a stage, doing their own thing, and they all have little solo moments as well. So that kind of, I think the musical itself really aligned with what we're about at the GradFest. It gives everyone equal opportunities, and you know, it puts 30 graduates at the front of the stage and highlights how talented they are. And hopefully this will, you know, I think I look at it as a way of proving to, you know, other people in the industry that there is talent and it just needs to be explored. And I think a lot of the time there's not enough time sometimes to explore because of budgets, and especially in the commercial sector where everything's so time consumed and everything moves so quickly. You know, there's not enough time to do 6 weeks of auditions and explore lots of new talent. And I think that's where it's our job at the GradFest to really highlight these people and go, here they are on a plate. And it's kind of spoon feeding, but it's worked. And, you know, a lot of people from 2020 have gone on to do really nice jobs. And I think that once that step happened and we saw people go and do that, that really warmed our hearts to go, this is why we do what we do. But yeah, so that's Elegies, which is on at the King's Head on the 19th of February for 2 shows.
Excellent. That's great. And we will talk about Lift in a little bit as well, because I know that that's another production that you've just announced in your very busy schedule. One of the things we're starting to get a couple of questions in the Q&A. If anyone else would like to ask any questions to Matt, Liam and Ameena, please feel free to pop them in there, and we'll start to get onto those shortly. I just wanted to ask one more question, which was kind of leading on from what you were saying there, Liam, about how we give people chances on the West End. And one of the things that's been interesting to me, and this was happening before the pandemic as well, but people have started to realize that some of the theatres, when they have their dark day, so whether that's a Sunday or a Monday or a Tuesday, whenever that is, that actually those theatres can be used on those days for other shows, as long as they're, you know, not going to be moving all of the big set out and anything like that. So we've always had things like Showstopper, the improvised musical, which has gone in on a Monday at places like the Lyric Theatre or the Garrick Theatre, and then we have things like is it Roles Will Never Play,
yeah,
which is there's various different iterations of the same sort of show. The Union Theatre do sometimes, but there's also another show which has been going around the different West End theatres as well. And I know that some of you have had experiences working on short runs in West End theatres, I think particularly in theatres that are owned by NIMAX. I was wondering if you would be able to say anything about how those experiences have worked for you, and particularly where you've been highlighting queer stories through those as well. Excuse me, I shouldn't be drinking Coke when I'm hosting a panel.
I mean, I think without the pandemic, we probably wouldn't be, I certainly wouldn't be producing theatre. And I don't think, you know, many people would have achieved as much as they have achieved over the past 2 years, because it has allowed us, one, time to develop, to connect, and a lot of, you know, producers and venues have been very open to, you know, chatting to new people and hearing new voices that are going to tell new stories. And I think what Nika did with her NIMAX venues was great, and it gave people a platform to go in and produce work. You know, and even we found that we went and did Graduates at Cadogan Hall. Me and Ameena did that, and that's something that we would have never have done in the normal life. But I think with the pandemic, it helped us secure venues like that, which was really nice.
Did you find a big difference working in bigger venues than working in some of the other venues that you have? Did you find a difference in the way you had to produce those things at all? I don't know whether that's a question for Liam or Ameena or Matt or all of you. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's quite, I guess when you're on a bigger scale, everything just seems, I think when you're sat at your computer 10 times worse, like, but like everything kind of just doubles in size, you know, from the venue to the budget and to what, you know, everything that you do. And I think it kind of can be scary, but my first big venue was Cadogan Hall, and you know, sometimes we did sit there and we're like, oh God, you know, there's a lot to do, and it's a mammoth task. But I think with the passion and the drive, you know, that's where you get the ambition to go and do it and produce that sort of work. I think if you're not passionate about it, then don't bother doing it because it's a hard graft.
Ameena, you've produced Death Drop, haven't you, on the West End as well? And so I was wondering if you could say anything about, I guess, again, about the different experiences of that, and how you approach that as a producer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did really bounce around the West End this summer. Me just jumping around doing everything, really. Yeah, also to say that, like, what Liam says about grads at CAD as well is, like, we were working with 40 different graduates over COVID with very strict schedules so that nobody would cross over, and everyone got COVID tested, and it was a huge, mammoth task for many reasons. But yes, in terms of Death Drop, so, like, to give an overview of what I did in the summer, which feels like years ago now. But I assistant produced The Show Must Go On Live, which was over 100 people working on different shows. We brought Death Drop back into the West End, having been in the West End in December, just before the first shutdown. And then I worked on a magic show that was on top of Harry Potter. So it was quite a mix of things. I think the big kind of difference with Death Drop and the big thing was, and I associate produced Death Drop with a brilliant company called Tuck Shop, who do a lot of amazing drag-led work. And I think the big thing was the moment of going, oh, look, this is really successful. And the moment of a lot of people realizing that actually it's not as big a risk as they thought it was, because actually there's a huge audience for this work. I think the big thing that I have, and the big reason that I fight for the title of as a commercial producer, is because a lot of people assume that work that's representative must be subsidized. And I don't believe that that's true at all. I think, you know, you see it in every single, there's a hunger for this type of work, and there's a hunger for, like, drag-led work, absolutely. There's a hunger for, like, all kinds of queer-led work. There's a hunger for just representation, being able to see yourself on stage. And the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that actually, just because you don't look like the person on stage doesn't mean you can't relate to them. And there are a lot of people who haven't, you know, had that representation at all, who need to relate, like, need to be able to see themselves on that stage, need to be able to see themselves behind that stage. I think people who've seen themselves represented for a very long time are fighting against that a little bit, not understanding that actually they can relate to people too, because we've been doing it. You know, we've been trying to find those people, and it's time for us to go, actually, let's widen that out. Let's show people what, not, you know, this huge world of people look like. And I think that's the really great thing about it, and the great thing about the space. The other great thing about that kind of time with Nika was that we all had that space to go, let's try something different. Let's try something new. Let's try something that actually a lot of people would say is a huge risk, because we're young producers, because we're, like, new to the West End, because we're doing queer work, because we're doing this, we're doing that. And it was that moment of being able to go, hey, this is actually incredibly successful in what it does. Why don't you actually stop looking at it as a risk? I think the language of risk, particularly around work like this, has always been really difficult. But it's really nice to have the space to go, hey, look, we're really good at what we do, and people want to see it. So it's just as commercial as everyone going to see, like, I'm not going to give an example of a show because I don't want to badmouth anyone. So exactly that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Ameena. So I've got some questions in the Q&A, which I'm going to open up to everybody. And you might find some of these questions are more relevant to one or more of you, but feel free to chip in as you wish. But the first one is, as a working class artist, what do you recommend as a pathway to developing a new musical, aside from funding contribution from the Arts Council? Also, the journey from subsidised to commercial when you don't have existing contacts and private funds. So I think there's two questions in there. So maybe we start with the first one. So as a working class artist, what do you recommend as a pathway to developing a new musical?
I think on this, I think, you know, class is such a big thing and so important that we recognise and, you know, give voices to, you know, people who are working class and give opportunities to as well. But I think you know, I was brought up in Rochdale, that's a tiny little town in Manchester, and, you know, it was a very working class town, and I went to GSA and you know, I got funding at college and then came into London. But I think the moment that I say to myself, I'm working class, that means I can't do it. it will then stop me from being able to cross that bridge. I think especially in this world, I think my class is something that I technically don't really think about, because I don't want to let that stop me from, being a commercial producer, just because I don't have access to lots of money in the bank. Do you know what I mean? And I think, when you go to saying when you don't have existing contacts or private funds, I think a lot of producers start out without any contacts or any private funds. But I think, you have to kind of just rack your brain and go, who do I know that, would love to support this show or this piece? Or, there's so many different ways of why people would support theatre. And I think you've got to understand why you're doing the piece before you then take it and pitch it to someone else, because they need to believe in you and the piece and why it's going to be successful. But, when you go to developing a new musical and not, maybe if you've got an unsuccessful Arts Council bid, there is other ways, there's lots of foundations and organisations that support theatre and project grants and things like that. I don't necessarily work in that kind of area, but I don't know whether Matt or Ameena have done.
Yeah, just to jump in quickly, because I think Matt is probably the best person on that. But in terms of not to completely contradict Liam, but like on the kind of, a lot of producers that start out without private funds. A lot of them have private funds. Like I'll be honest, a lot of producers have money behind them before they start producing, and like we are exceptions to that rule. I do not come from money. I'm middle class, very much so, and I'll be honest about that. But like I don't come from like money, and also my parents are both immigrants. I don't know rich people. So it is very much about like building those contacts, and yes, it is about thinking about the people that but it's also about thinking about your USP. At the end of the day, like the thing that is going to get you people who are going to fund your work is going, do you know what, this is my story, this is like exactly why I want to be supported, who fits that, and like, it's like Liam says, it's not an easy thing to do, it's not easy at all, but like if we don't do it, then the people who've been doing it for ages are going to continue doing it. It's going to be very boring forever. So, we have to. And in terms of that jump from subsidized to commercial, like a lot of the same people are around in both worlds. So a lot of those people that you see donating to theatres also invest in theatre work later. So like there's kind of a mix there. So I'd say that I want to be really honest, like, a lot of producers do come from money. That is true. And it is difficult knowing that, but there is a world where you can find the people who are going to support your work. Absolutely. And there's a world in pairing kind of Arts Council and subsidized funding with commercial funding. Liam and I were talking about it last night, actually, but there's like a world to do that. So there are a lot of different ways of finding that money, and there's, as Liam says, really great schemes like the Mercury musical development and really great things like that do support new musicals, and hopefully there'll be more of them. But I will now hand over to Matt. I just wanted to be like, a lot of producers to come from money, like, just to be honest.
It's an interesting one, these journeys, something I've been really looking towards is regional venues around the UK that have artist development programs that often will kind of help, even through workshops or sort of one-to-one guidance and things like that, will provide stepping stones, like ways to further and better your work. And I found it's all in building that network, but surrounding yourself with people that believe in that work and can help point to things. There are so many. It was quite exciting, as there are a lot of schemes emerging all over, and a lot of opportunities as well to go for not just the big Arts Council money, which might be more down the end goal of getting the work out there, but say the work of places like Mercury Musicals, ALP Musicals, the Lowry do some phenomenal development programs through their rewrite stuff. There's lots of places that you can go to and start those conversations, or even just to get a bit of advice. Perfect Pitch as well have a huge repertoire of amazing work they've helped develop and is going on to future productions and the like in the coming years and such. So I think have a look at that sort of landscape out there. I think the development landscape is growing, which is a really exciting thing, and I think opportunities for workshops or sort of one-to-one artist consultancy sessions and things like that can really help take that next step. But it's a minefield of funding, and my only real experience has been through Arts Council funding, which is a real, like, it's a challenging landscape to work in sometimes, but surround yourself with people that can help and believe in it to help that first push forward is something I strongly believe in.
Thanks so much for that. And the one thing I'd add to that as well is that universities such as the University of Wolverhampton are also sometimes good places to develop musicals. At the very least, most universities that run musical theatre courses have people that have had experience as dramaturgs or people who have read a lot of musicals, and we're also helpful. I mean, one of the things that I was just thinking, maybe I'm becoming the Christopher Biggins of musical theatre academia, but one of the things that I can do is put people in touch with other people. Because of the work that I've been doing recently, I do know quite a few people, and I know who's interested in what, so you can always use people like myself as well, and just have a chat with us, and we'll see what we can do to help you with that. So the next question is, are there any tips as a producer when getting queer or trans new work theatre programmed at regional theatres?
Well, it's the same question as getting programmed at regional theatres. Same question as get programmed at theatres. It's difficult, and they don't really reply. But like, kind of the best tip really is, like, firstly, keep it short. People don't read long emails, and particularly people in buildings don't have the time to read long emails. So know exactly what it is that you're going to them for and what you're selling. And also pick theatres that have done work that feels like it aligns. I think there are a lot of really, really great regional theatres out there. If you're able to find ones that you're like, hey, you programmed this show, and you'll have the data from that. Similarly, here's this show that we're bringing. I think that's always a really great way to sell it. And also building those contacts when you don't have work. So building contacts before you have the work to give them is a really great way of doing it, because I now get to the point where people send me emails asking me if I have work to put into venues. That takes a while. Took a lot of please answer my email, please. But yeah, and just building those relationships and getting them to see work, even if you're not looking to get it programmed, and meeting them and talking to them. It's about building the relationship, because the second that they already know who you are, then they're able to go, oh, and now you've been developing this piece of work. Wonderful. Let's see it. Let's chat about it.
Go on, Matt.
Yeah, I sort of kind of further to that, I think something I've been thinking about a lot is what the first step is, or what best showcases what the musical can be. So looking at mainly within my field of musical theatre, creating demos, creating short extracts of what the thing can be. It could even just be something read through Zoom. I know I struggle with reading, but I really enjoy watching things and listening to things, and that helps best sort of go in. But also really, I think the point Ameena made about looking at spaces that align to the sort of work you're doing or you want to do is a really important thing as well, just to really show you've done that research essentially in why you're going to that space, because you could do a blanket email to 100 venues and no one will get back to you. But if you've really considered that connection, that can be a really successful thing to do.
I think I'd also say, specifically with trans new work, it would be useful to get in touch with Trans Voices, the True Voices company, who represent a lot of trans performers, just to talk things through, and as a sounding board. They are wonderful. I'd also say that actually there is a lot more appetite for programming queer and trans new work in regional theatres. And sometimes it is just finding the right sort of place to start. Again, I will mention the Arena Theatre, which is linked to the University of Wolverhampton, which is a very small scale black box theatre, but definitely is interested in programming things that reflect our community in Wolverhampton and Walsall and in Birmingham and that sort of thing. So again, it's useful, like everyone's been saying, really, to really do your research and think about which theatres might be most interested in the work that you're presenting there. I think I've got a question directly for Liam here, if that's okay. So this is from one of our PhD students, Josie, who is currently writing a piece on Lift the musical. Hurrah! So very excited to hear that it's been produced for 2022. Liam, I'd love to hear more about it, and what is it that drew you to Lift as a piece? And what do you think is significant about it that makes it an exciting piece to revive, particularly in terms of representation?
I mean, I have loved Lift for quite a while. And it was, I just kind of went on to inquire about the rights. And then 2 weeks later, I was just meeting a director for some lunch, and he said to me, I really want to do this show. And I said, oh, what show? And he said, oh, it's Lift. And I was like, oh, that's funny, because I want to do it too. So that's where it kind of started. I think we looked at what the 2013 version of Lift was. And it went through Perfect Pitch to be developed, which is a wonderful place that develops lots of new work and then kind of licenses it out afterwards, which is, they do a lot of musicals. And I think we looked at that version and we looked at what the show has to offer and what we want to do with it. And I think with the show not necessarily having kind of specific character descriptions, there's 8 people, but it's not very specific in what it's asking for in terms of like, any kind of diversity, really. I think it's a great piece, and what we want to do is represent contemporary London as it is now, and really put all them voices onto the stage, and show that this is what London looks like right now. And because that, I think, is very important. And I think what happened with it at the Soho when it was first on, and it had Julie Atherton and George Maguire and Cynthia, I think they moved from that production and they kind of just went up. And they, at that time, were quite new voices in the industry. And I think what we want to do is do that same kind of pattern with these 8 actors, and is build them up and platform them to kind of move further and like further their careers. So, it is going to be very exciting, and we're in auditions next week. But yeah, so back to your question, that's why I kind of was drawn to it. I think everyone wants the musical, or wanted the musical, to come back. I think there's a lot of people who enjoyed the musical when it was at the Soho. So I think that's kind of what drew me to bringing it back. I thought it was the right time, and it's nearly 10 years since it was last done. But yeah, so that's Lift.
It's really interesting. There's kind of a bigger question that comes out of Lift as well, because Lift has I believe a lesbian character and a gay, or it could be a gay or bisexual male character. I think actually perhaps even another bisexual male character, because of the environment that the gay character's found in. Because LGBT identities change so quickly, and I guess this was true to some extent with the Wiz in terms of identities to do with race as well. When you're approaching a piece and you're reviving a piece, how much flexibility do you have to be able to update things so that they keep moving at the same time as representation keeps moving?
I think we've been really thankful and grateful that we've been able to, and we are still working with Craig and Ian to update the piece, and really reflect what is happening now, and kind of make sure that the musical fits in 2022, because it is a contemporary musical. But I also think it's even small things that are going to change within who we're casting and things like that, and what kind of who the characters are. Like pronouns, which are so important, is going to be very important as we move through the text of the book and going back to different characters. But then also, when we're talking about the French teacher who is a lesbian, it's very important that we find someone from the LGBT community to have that voice on stage and, be that character. I think that for me, that's so important, is that we put voices into characters that are, so they feel like they're represented.
Absolutely. And did you want to add anything to that, Ameena, in terms of the Wiz? Because that was a much older piece.
Yeah, it was a lot more difficult, like in terms of it's very protected. So like it's hugely It's a bit of a fight to change anything. There is one relationship that's that's like alluded to in The Wiz, and it is the moment at the end of the. I mean, if people don't know it, it's similar in story to the Wizard of Oz, but the final kind of moment is the Wiz giving, you know, the brain and the heart and all of these things. In giving the Tin Man the heart, he has like a soft toy bear that he takes a like little heart out of, like, you know, a classic Valentine's bear, and gives it to him and says, at one point this like crazy chick, something very American, gave me this. She went bananas for me and gave me this. And I was talking to our director Matthew, and I went, it's the only relationship that's represented in The Wiz. Why don't we just change the pronouns? You know, why don't we make it a gay relationship? Because we can, and because like I was like, if we're going to have a relationship in it, I want it to be that. And it's a family show, and it's incredibly important to me that we like even those small things. And it's not a big deal that like the friends don't react to it at all when he says it. It's just in there, and it's the only relationship that's represented in The Wiz. And really the kind of the reason for doing that and for changing that was because that was one thing that I was like, this feels like it could be updated. That said, most of the piece is still the same. There's moments in it which just kind of hit you really like hard, because you're like, this was written in the 70s and it's still very poignant. There is a moment where the lion has been being taken off by what's called the mice squad, which is obviously a reference to police, and he shouts for his mum, and like that is genuinely in the script, and it continually happens. And every time we see Black men interacting with the police in these horrible settings, often the thing they call for is their mother, and it still happens. And like that moment, it's so kind of, it's completely passing, and if you're not thinking about it, it won't hit you, but like that really like gets me every time, that it's still so poignant in spite of the fact that it was written, you know, in the 70s. At the same time, there is absolutely a lot of stuff where like, oh, this is very American or very weirdly said, but really the magic of that is having a director like Matthew Zia who's able to go, do you know what, let's kind of pull this apart and put things into it. And we set it in Manchester, and we changed the accents so they're representative of the entire diaspora as far as we could. And obviously, you know, you can't represent everyone, but we do our best to have all of these different voices in there and different accents and different spaces that feel very homely. So in that sense, it was a lot about creating the direction that pulls it around. I mean, there's a moment where they're you know, on one knee, and there's a moment where the TV is showing scenes of like the protests in 2020 and of Marcus Rashford's mural and that kind of thing. So it's really about thinking about ways to update it in other ways as well, when you can't hugely change what the script is.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We've got one more question because we are coming to the end of our time now, but this question is, how do you like to find new work, I guess, as a producer? So if we have an idea, is it best to email directly and ask to meet, to pitch, or are there other ways that you prefer to be contacted with new work?
I think Ameena have spoke about this quite a lot. I think you have to you have to know why you want that producer to produce that piece of work. You know, you can't, and as much as you want the piece of work produced, there's going to be a producer that wants to produce that piece of work too. And it's not going to appeal to someone if that's not the kind of work that, you know, that they do. And, you know, I think that's what you've got to think about when you're writing that email at first. I think, look at what they've done, look at why, you know, what does their website say? Why is it? And then when you do email to someone, make sure that you state why you think that it would be a good match. You know, I think it works in both ways, but, you know, it's one of them things where I think there's lots of great writing and there's lots of great producers, and you've just got to make sure you do the research to find the right person for you. But yeah, Liam
and I once got exactly the same pitch email, and we know, like, I will tell you now, the second I got that email, I was like, have you gotten an email from someone that looks exactly like this? We always know, and it's like, and I understand it takes a lot that you're writing that email over and over again to different people, but if you're doing that, I would say that approaching 5 producers that you've actually looked into and feel like they align with your work is so much more likely to be successful than approach 50 producers with exactly the same email. And like, we're not asking for you to do a lot. Like, it's a sentence that just says, I've seen this part of your work, I've seen this that you do. I get that all the time. Also, I have a submissions inbox, which is soon to be handled by my being hired at the moment assistant. But like, that's completely open, and the submissions inbox is the rolling window and everything. But the number of submissions I get that I'm like, you clearly don't know the work I do. There's no secret to it. I mean, I have a mission statement that's on my website. You can see what work I've made. You can see what's important. I've done a lot of interviews and podcasts and spoken about my work a lot. So anytime somebody sends me an email that's clearly, like, one, doesn't have any information about the show in it, or the person or anything, or two, doesn't have any alignment with what I do, it's just, I understand it's very difficult as an artist to find a producer, and like to feel, you know, the second you see someone that is producing work, you go, they must be the person to produce my show. But actually, if you take the time to look at it, you'll find someone that's much better and fits much better for you, which absolutely might be me, Matt, or Liam, and that absolutely might be the case. But if you're emailing all three of us, you're probably doing something wrong, because we don't all do the same work.
Yeah, and I also think it's about looking at what do you want from, like, I think people come and say, you know, I'd love for you to read my show, I'd love for you to produce it, but what is it that you want producing? Yeah. Is it an R&D? Like, or is it a full-scale production? Like, what we need to know what you want, so that we can then look and see if that's something that is in our capacity and something that we would do.
It's knowing the journey you want to go on with a producer. Why are you inviting us into your world? Like, I love reading new stuff, like, and I'm happy to always read something, but I'm only interested in a certain type of work. I also only have the capacity to do a certain type of work. So I think it's whenever someone's come and has shown oh, that's what you do, this is kind of what I need at this moment, I'm bound to take an interest and bound to find the time to sort of help, because especially with queer musical work, there needs to be more of it, and there needs to be more intersectional work. So we'll always make space and time to support that in any capacity, as long as you know where you want to go with it, or how one of us or any of the amazing producers that are out there can actually help you with that journey. Yeah.
And I think, thank you very much. I think actually what we've just said there also perhaps answers the question about when it's best to start conversations with commercial producers, because it's all down to the same thing. It's down to whether that producer is the right producer for your work, and whether your work is right for you know, what scale is your work for, what are you looking for with your work. And I'm sorry we can't answer that question in any more detail, but we're actually at the end of our time there now. So I just want to say thank you very much to Liam, Ameena and Matt. Is there anything burning that anybody else wanted to say before we finished at all? No, that's great. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Liam, Ameena and Matt, and for, you know, all of the wisdom that you have imparted there, and to say to you, you know, to wish you all the best with your forthcoming shows, and we look forward to seeing those. And thanks again for the conversation. Thank you to everybody here for joining us. And next week on Friday we have another panel. We've got a panel every Friday through February. Next week we're talking about LGBTQ characters in high school musicals, not just high school musicals set in high schools. And we'll be with Marvin Charles and Connor Carson, who recently finished the production of Bring It On. So I hope that you'll join us for that. It's all advertised through Eventbrite in the same place as this was, but we hope that you'll join us for that. And thank you very much. Take care, have a lovely weekend, and I'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.